The shoebox sits on my lap like a loaded gun. My name is Faith, and tonight I'm about to destroy my family. The irony isn't lost on me that we're celebrating my mother's 48th birthday at Chez Laurent, the same restaurant where she used to take me for special occasions when I was little, back when I still believed she loved me more than she loved herself. Faith, honey, you've been so quiet tonight, Mom says, her freshly injected lips curving into what passes for a smile these days. Are you feeling all right? I adjust the black leather box on my lap, feeling the weight of $48,000 in cash inside. Sequential bills, each one stamped with a single word in red ink. Retribution. I'm perfect, Mom, just waiting for the right moment. Dad shifts uncomfortably in his seat, loosening his tie. He's been nervous all evening, though he doesn't know why yet. Alexandra, my 20-year-old sister, scrolls through her phone between bites of her salmon. She looks so much like Mom did at that age, before the surgeries, before the lies became a lifestyle. Well, I have to say, this has been the most wonderful birthday, Mom continues, her voice carrying that practiced sweetness she uses when she wants something. Having my whole family together like this, it's everything I could ask for. Grandma Vienna sits across from me, her weathered hands folded neatly on the table. At 72, she's the only one here who remembers what Mom was like before she became Trisha, the trophy wife. Grandma's phone rests beside her water glass, screen dark but ready. Actually, Mom, I brought you something special. I lift the shoebox slightly. A birthday gift that's been 4 years in the making. Alexandra finally looks up from her phone. Ooh, what is it? Designer shoes? Something like that. I stand, the box cradled in my arms like a newborn. But first I want to make a toast. Dad raises his wine glass automatically, the way he's been trained to do for the past 23 years of marriage. Mom beams, probably expecting some heartfelt speech about gratitude and family bonds. To my mother, I begin, my voice steady and clear. Who taught me that family is everything, that we should always put each other first, that we should never, ever steal from the people we love. Mom's smile falters, just slightly, but I catch it. Faith. Dad starts, but I cut him off, especially when those people are 17 years old and trusting you with their entire future. I set the shoebox on the table with a soft thud. Happy birthday, Mom. The silence stretches like a taut wire. Mom stares at the box as if it might explode, which, in a way, it will. What is this? She whispers. Open it. Her manicured fingers tremble as she lifts the lid. The cash sits in neat stacks, rubber-banded and organized. Underneath, a manila envelope thick with documents. And on top of everything, a single sheet of paper with my handwriting. For services unrendered. Every penny you stole from my college fund, with interest. I hope your new face was worth it. Mom's wine glass slips from her hand, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Dad chokes on his drink, coughing violently. Alexandra's mouth falls open. Faith, what the hell? Alexandra starts. $48,000, I announce, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. That's how much she took from my college savings account when I was 17. Forged my signature. Told everyone I decided to take a gap year, when really she spent my future on plastic surgery and designer handbags. That's not... I would never... Mom stammers, but her face has gone pale beneath her foundation. Grandma Vienna picks up her phone and starts recording. Keep going, sweetheart! The envelope contains copies of every forged withdrawal slip, every bank statement, every receipt I could track down, including the one from Dr. Townsend's office for your breast augmentation, paid for with my money. Dad's face crumples. Trisha, tell me this isn't true. But Mom can't speak. She's staring at the money like it's a snake about to strike. I lean forward, my hands flat on the table. You humiliated me, made me look like a failure who couldn't even get into college. Let me struggle with debt and shame while you paraded around in your new body, bought with my dreams. Faith, please. For services unrendered, Mom. I straighten up, smoothing my dress. I'll never let you rob another daughter again. The restaurant has gone quiet around us. Other diners pretend not to stare while obviously hanging on every word. Mom looks around frantically, realizing her perfect public image is crumbling in real time. As chaos erupts across the table, Dad demanding answers, Alexandra crying, Mom hyperventilating, I allow myself the smallest smile. This is only the beginning. 4 years earlier, I was 17 and stupid enough to believe my mother loved me. I remember the exact moment everything changed. It was a Tuesday in March, and I was supposed to be at soccer practice. Instead, I'd come home early with a migraine, creeping through the back door so I wouldn't disturb Mom's afternoon routine. That's when I heard her voice drifting from the kitchen, honey-sweet and conspiratorial. No, I understand the payment schedule, she was saying into her phone. The consultation fee, then the surgery deposit. Yes, I can have the full amount by Friday. I froze in the hallway, my backpack sliding off my shoulder. It's not like she's going to need it right away, Mom continued with a laugh. College is still over a year away, and honestly, state schools are so much more practical these days. My blood turned to ice water. She was talking about my college fund, the account Dad and I had been building since I was 12, every birthday check and summer job paycheck carefully deposited for my future. Trust me, Dr. Townsend, this is an investment in my family's happiness. A confident mother is a better mother, right? I backed toward the door, but my shoe squeaked against the hardwood. The conversation stopped abruptly. Faith? Is that you, honey? I had 2 choices, run or confront. 17-year-old me chose confrontation. Mom, what were you talking about? She appeared in the kitchen doorway, phone pressed against her chest, her smile too bright. Oh, just boring adult stuff. Why aren't you at practice? What did you mean about my college fund? Her laugh was like breaking glass. Sweetie, you're being paranoid. I was talking to the bank about refinancing the mortgage. You mentioned Dr. Townsend. That's not a bank. Faith, really? You're 17. You don't understand how family finances work. She moved past me toward the stairs. Sometimes parents have to make difficult decisions for the good of everyone. I followed her. What kind of decisions? She spun around, and for just a second, her mask slipped. I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes that I'd never noticed before. The kind that aren't your business. That night, I logged into my savings account for the first time in months. The balance that should have been 48,247 showed 0 reals. Account closed due to insufficient funds. I printed the statements with shaking hands. The withdrawals had started 3 months earlier. Small amounts at first, $500 here, $200 there. Then bigger chunks. The final withdrawal, made just 2 days ago, cleaned out everything that remained. Every single withdrawal slip bore a signature that looked like mine but wasn't quite right. The F in Faith was too loopy. The L in Lewis had an extra flourish I'd never made. I confronted her the next morning at breakfast. Dad had already left for work, and Alexandra was still asleep. I know what you did. Mom didn't even look up from her coffee. What are you talking about now? I slammed the bank statements on the table. You stole my college money. She glanced at the papers, then at me, completely calm. I borrowed against your account for a family emergency. I'll pay it back. What emergency? And why didn't you ask me? Because you're a child, Faith. This is my house and these are adult decisions. It's my money. I earned most of it myself. She stood up, towering over me in her silk robe. Nothing in this house belongs to you. Nothing. Your father and I provide everything. Your food, your clothes, your roof. That money was always ours. That's not how college funds work, and you know it. Lower your voice. Her tone turned dangerous. You're being dramatic and ungrateful. I've sacrificed everything for this family. By stealing from your own daughter. She slapped me, not hard, but the shock of it left me speechless. I didn't steal anything. I made a strategic financial decision. And if you keep running your mouth about this, you'll find out exactly how much I've been protecting you from. I touched my cheek, staring at her. This woman who'd read me bedtime stories and cheered at my soccer games had just hit me for asking about my own money. You can't do this. Watch me. She picked up her phone. In fact, let me make this easier for everyone. I'm calling your guidance counselor today to let her know you've decided to take a gap year. Give you time to mature and figure out what you really want. No! I got into Northwestern. I have scholarships pending. Had scholarships pending, past tense. She smiled, and it was the cruelest expression I'd ever seen. Don't worry, sweetheart. Community college builds character. 2 weeks later, she came home from her health retreat, looking like a completely different person. New breasts, new nose, new chin. She told everyone she'd been at a spa in Arizona, recovering from exhaustion. The neighbors complimented her glow. Dad said she looked 10 years younger. Alexandra asked if she could get her nose done too when she turned 18. And I sat in my room, acceptance letters scattered around me like broken dreams, planning my escape. I left home on a Thursday night in August with nothing but a duffel bag and my laptop. Northwestern had held my spot despite the delayed enrollment. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had made some calls after I showed up at school with bank statements and a story that made her cry. Full merit scholarship plus work study. I'd be broke, but I'd be free. Mom found my note the next morning. Gone to college. Don't look for me. She didn't. My dorm room was a shoebox I shared with a girl named Jenny, who collected vintage band posters and ate cereal for every meal. I worked in the campus library 20 hours a week, tutored calculus on weekends, and picked up freelance web design jobs whenever I could find them. You're going to burn out, Jenny warned me one night, watching me code at 2 a.m. while she painted her nails black. Can't burn out if you never slow down, I muttered, squinting at my screen. That's how I met Caden. He messaged me through a freelancer platform about building a website for his friend's food truck business. We ended up on a video call that lasted 3 hours, talking about everything except web design. So, you're basically working 3 jobs while taking 18 credit hours? He asked, his face pixelated on my ancient laptop screen. 4 jobs if you count tutoring separately. That's insane. What's driving you? I almost told him the truth right then. Something about his voice, warm but not pushy, made me want to spill everything. Instead I said, student loans are a nightmare. Fair enough. Well, this project pays well, and I've got more where it came from if you're interested. Caden became my lifeline. Not romantically. We were both too busy and too guarded for that. But as the one person who understood the hustle. He was working his way through grad school, building apps and websites for small businesses while studying computer science. You should think bigger, he told me during one of our late-night work sessions over video chat. Stop taking one-off projects. Build something scalable. Like what? I don't know yet, but you're too smart to be coding wedding websites forever. The answer came during my junior year when the pandemic hit. Suddenly, every small business in America needed to go digital overnight. Restaurants needed online ordering systems. Retail shops needed e-commerce platforms. Service providers needed virtual booking systems. I called Caden at midnight on a Tuesday. I know what we're building, I said without preamble. Hello to you too. What time is it? A virtual operations platform. One-stop shopping for small businesses to get online. Templates, payment processing, inventory management, customer service integration. Everything. Silence on the other end. Then, that's actually brilliant. How fast can you build a prototype? Give me 2 weeks. I didn't sleep for 14 days. Jenny brought me energy drinks and leftover pizza while I coded like my life depended on it. Which, in a way, it did. The platform launched 3 months later. We called it Quick Shift Solutions. Within 6 months, we had 200 clients. Within a year, we had 2,000. Faith, we need to talk about scaling, Caden said during one of our weekly check-ins. He was calling from his apartment in Seattle, where he'd moved after graduation. I'm listening. We're making serious money now, like life-changing money. You could quit school. I'm not quitting school. Why not? You're already running a successful business. Because I needed that degree. Because I needed to prove to myself, and to Mom, wherever she was, that I could finish what I started, that she hadn't broken me. I graduate in December. I can handle both for 6 more months. Okay, but we need to incorporate. Get proper legal protection. And Faith? Yeah? You should probably tell your family you're not actually a broke college student anymore. I laughed, but it came out bitter. My family thinks I'm taking a gap year to find myself. They have no idea I'm even in school. Wait, what? It's been 3 years. 3.5, and they've never called, never texted, never asked how I'm doing. That's... Wow, I'm sorry. Don't be. It's better this way. But it wasn't. Really. Sometimes I'd see other students FaceTiming their parents, complaining about professors or sharing good grades, and I'd feel this hollow ache in my chest. I'd check social media and see photos of Mom and Alexandra at spa days or shopping trips, looking like the perfect mother-daughter duo. Mom had gotten more work done. Her Instagram was full of selfies with captions about living your best life and investing in yourself. She looked like a completely different person from the woman who'd raised me. I graduated summa cum laude on a grey December morning. The ceremony was small due to COVID restrictions. I sat alone in the audience section reserved for families, watching my classmates hug their parents and pose for pictures. My phone buzzed with a text from Caden. Proud of you? Ready to take over the world now? I typed back. Almost. One more thing to take care of first. That night, I started researching private investigators. The private investigator's name was Marcus, and he looked exactly like you'd expect. Rumpled suit, coffee stains, and the weary expression of someone who'd seen too much human ugliness. You want me to investigate your own mother? He asked, leaning back in his squeaky office chair. I want documentation, legal documentation of financial fraud committed against a minor. How long ago are we talking? 4 years, but I have bank statements, and I need someone who knows how to make them stick in court if necessary. Marcus whistled low. Statute of limitations might be an issue, depending on the state. But let's see what you've got. I spread the papers across his desk like tarot cards revealing a dark future. Bank statements, withdrawal slips, account closure notices, the paper trail of my stolen dreams. These signatures, Marcus said, squinting through riding glasses. They're close, but not perfect. See here? The pressure's different. The angle of the pen. Can you prove they're forgeries? With the right handwriting expert? Absolutely. What else you got? I pulled out my phone and showed him screenshots of Mom's social media from that time period. Her transformation documented in real time, the subtle changes week by week, then the dramatic reveal after her health retreat. Cosmetic surgery's expensive, Marcus noted. You're talking $40,000–50,000 minimum for this level of work. $48,000! That's exactly what was in my account. Convenient coincidence. He made a note. I'll need a few weeks to dig deeper. Bank records, medical records if I can get them legally, maybe some interviews with people who knew your family then. Whatever it costs. 3 weeks later, Marcus called me back to his office. This time his desk was covered with folders thick enough to choke a horse. Your mother's been busy, he said without preamble. The good news is I can prove fraud. Prove. The bad news is it's worse than you thought. He opened the first folder. Forged signatures on 17 separate withdrawal slips. I had a handwriting expert analyze them. She'll testify in court that these weren't signed by the same person who signed your school enrollment forms. What's the bad news? She didn't just steal from you. Marcus opened another folder. Your sister, Alexandra, has a college fund too. Smaller amounts, but there's been activity. Withdrawals starting about 6 months ago. My stomach dropped. How much? 8,000 so far. Small enough that a 20-year-old might not notice, especially if she's not checking regularly. I stared at the papers, feeling sick. She's doing it again. Gets worse. I found records of your mother opening credit cards in your name when you turned 18. She's been making minimum payments, but there's about 12,000 in debt she racked up that first year. What? That's impossible. I would have known. Not if she had the statements sent to a P.O. box, which she did. Marcus slid another document across the desk. Credit report shows 3 cards opened in 2019, all with your social security number, all with a mailing address that's not your family home. I felt like I was drowning. Can she do that legally? Hell no. Identity theft, fraud, forgery. Your mother's committed about 6 different felonies here. Why didn't this show up when I applied for student loans? Because she's been making payments, keeping the accounts current so they wouldn't flag your credit. Smart, in a completely illegal way. I leaned back in my chair, processing. What else? Marcus opened a 3rd folder. This is where it gets interesting. Your mother's been seeing a financial planner, setting up LLCs, moving money around. She's also been meeting regularly with a divorce attorney. She's leaving Dad. Looks like she's preparing to. The attorney specializes in high-asset divorces. Your mother's been building a case that she's entitled to more than half of everything because she sacrificed her career for the family. That's ridiculous. She never had a career. Doesn't matter if the judge believes her story. Marcus pulled out another document. Here's the kicker. She's been having an affair with her plastic surgeon, Dr. Townsend, the same guy who did her work with your college money. I stared at the surveillance photos. Mom and a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, holding hands outside a hotel, kissing in the front seat of his BMW, looking like teenagers in love. How long? At least 2 years, based on what I could document. Probably longer. Does Dad know? If he does, he's a better actor than I thought. I interviewed some of his co-workers. They all think he's got the perfect marriage. I gathered the papers, my hands shaking slightly. What would you do if this was your family? Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. Kid, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen families destroyed by secrets, and I've seen them destroyed by truth. Either way, somebody gets hurt. That's not an answer. The answer is, it depends what you can live with. Can you live with knowing all this and doing nothing? Or can you live with the consequences of exposing it? I stood up, tucking the folders under my arm. How much do I owe you? 3,000. But Faith? He stood too, extending his hand. Whatever you decide to do with this information, be careful. People do desperate things when their whole world's about to collapse. I shook his hand, feeling the weight of evidence against my own mother. Thanks for the warning. Grandma Vienna answered her door in a flour-dusted apron, looking exactly the same as she had when I was 12 and sneaking cookies from her kitchen. Faith! My goodness, child, what are you doing here? Hi, Grandma. Can we talk? She stepped aside, ushering me into the familiar warmth of her living room. The same crocheted afghans, the same family photos on the mantel, though I noticed several recent ones of Mom and Alexandra were conspicuously absent. Sit, sit. I'll make tea. You look thin. I'm fine, Grandma. Actually, I'm doing really well. She paused in the doorway to the kitchen. Are you? Because your mother told everyone you dropped out of college and disappeared, said you were going through a rebellious phase. What would you say if I told you I graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, and I'm running my own tech company? Grandma Vienna set down her tea kettle with a sharp clink. I'd say that sounds more like the Faith I raised than the story your mother's been telling. Then you'll want to see this. I opened my laptop and showed her Quick Shift's website, our client testimonials, the business articles that had featured us. Her weathered hands traced the screen as she read. 2,000 clients? Faith, this is incredible. Why didn't you tell us? Because Mom told me not to come back. Because she stole my college fund and spent it on plastic surgery. Because she's been lying to everyone for 4 years. Grandma Vienna sank into her recliner, suddenly looking every one of her 72 years. Tell me everything. I did. The whole story, from the overheard phone call to Marcus's investigation. I showed her the bank statements, the forged signatures, the photos of Mom with Dr. Townsend. When I finished, Grandma Vienna was quiet for a long time, staring at the evidence spread across her coffee table. I knew something was wrong, she finally said. Your mother changed after that surgery, got secretive, started lying about little things, and the way she talked about you, like you were an embarrassment instead of her daughter. She's doing it to Alexandra now, taking money from her account. That girl worships her mother, thinks Trisha hung the moon. Which is why she needs to know the truth. Grandma Vienna picked up one of the surveillance photos, studying Mom's face. What are you planning to do with all this? I want to expose her, publicly, the same way she humiliated me. And you want my help. I want you to be there when it happens, to witness it, to make sure the family knows this isn't just me being vindictive. She was quiet again, then stood up and walked to the mantel. She picked up a photo of Mom from her high school graduation, young, fresh-faced, genuinely smiling. I failed her somehow, Grandma Vienna said softly, raised a daughter who could steal from her own child. This isn't your fault, isn't it? I taught her that image mattered, that what people thought was important. Maybe I created this monster. You didn't create anything. Mom made her own choices. Grandma Vienna turned back to me. What exactly do you want me to do? Mom's birthday is next month. I know Dad's planning something at that fancy restaurant she likes. I want to give her a present she'll never forget. What kind of present? I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken at the bank that morning. Stacks of cash, $48,000 in sequential bills, each one stamped with red ink. Every penny she stole, with interest, plus copies of every document proving what she did. In public? In front of the whole family. In front of everyone. Let her explain to Dad why his wife's been stealing from their children and cheating on him with her plastic surgeon. Grandma Vienna studied the photos, then looked at me with something that might have been pride. You want me to record it. I want you to make sure there's evidence, so she can't spin this later, can't make herself the victim. This will destroy your family, Faith. Your father, your sister, they'll be devastated. My family was already destroyed. I'm just making sure everyone else knows it. She walked to her kitchen window, looking out at the garden she'd tended for 40 years. Your mother calls me every Sunday, tells me about Alexandra's college classes, about the charity work she's doing, about how proud she is of her family. All lies. I know that now. She turned back to me. But Faith, once we do this, there's no going back. Your sister will hate you. Your father might never forgive you. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared to watch her do to Alexandra what she did to me? Grandma Vienna was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked to her junk drawer and pulled out her phone. Show me how to work the video camera on this thing. I spent the next hour teaching my 72-year-old grandmother how to record, how to upload to social media, how to make sure the video would be seen by everyone in Mom's carefully curated social circle. One more thing, I said as I was leaving. Don't tell anyone I was here. Let this be a complete surprise. What if she tries to leave? What if she sees what's coming and runs? I smiled, and I knew it wasn't a kind expression. She won't run. She's too vain. She'll think she can talk her way out of it, charm everyone into believing her version of events. And if she can't, then she'll finally understand what it feels like to lose everything. The black leather shoebox cost me $300. Custom-made, with brass corners and a lock that clicked with satisfying finality. Inside, I arranged the money in perfect stacks, sequential bills from the bank, each one stamped with that single red word, retribution. You sure about this? Caden asked over video chat, watching me organize the documents. Once you do this, there's no taking it back. I've been sure for 4 years. I know, but seeing your family implode in real time, that's going to be brutal. I sealed the manila envelope containing every piece of evidence Marcus had gathered. Bank statements, forged signatures, credit reports, surveillance photos of Mom and Dr. Townsend, A complete record of 4 years of lies. They imploded the day she stole my money. I'm just making it visible. What about Alexandra? She's going to be devastated. Alexandra is 20 years old and still thinks Mom hung the moon. She needs to know what she's dealing with before Mom destroys her too. I placed the envelope in the box, on top of the money. The final touch was my handwritten note, the words I'd been composing in my head for years. For services unrendered, every penny you stole from my college fund, with interest. I hope your new face was worth it. Faith. Yeah? I'm proud of you, for surviving this, for building something amazing despite everything she did. Thanks. That means a lot. Call me after, okay? Whatever happens. I promised I would, then spent the rest of the evening getting ready. Black dress, simple but elegant. Hair pulled back in a sleek bun. Minimal makeup. I wanted to look like the successful businesswoman I'd become, not the broken teenager Mom remembered. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered it. Chez Laurent, with its dim lighting and white tablecloths, the kind of place where wealthy people went to see and be seen. I arrived 30 minutes late on purpose, parking across the street where I could watch my family through the large windows. There they were, the perfect family portrait. Dad in his best suit, looking uncomfortable but trying. Alexandra in a floral dress, animated and laughing. Mom at the head of the table in something designer and low-cut, holding court like the queen she believed herself to be. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, watching them. Alexandra showed Mom something on her phone, probably photos from college. Dad refilled wine glasses with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Mom gestured grandly, telling some story that made Alexandra giggle. They looked happy, normal, like the family I'd once thought we were. My phone buzzed with a text from Grandma Vienna. I'm here, sitting 2 tables away. Are you ready? I typed back, ready. Another text. Your father looks nervous, keeps checking his watch. He always does that at restaurants, worried about the bill. Your sister looks beautiful, so young. I stared at that message for a long moment, feeling something twist in my chest. Alexandra did look young and trusting and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. But then, I remembered the bank statements Marcus had shown me. The $8,000 already missing from Alexandra's account. The pattern repeating itself. I picked up the shoebox and got out of the car. The hostess recognized me immediately. I'd made the reservation under my real name, knowing it would get back to Dad. Miss Faith, your family is already seated. Right this way. I followed her through the dining room, past tables full of couples celebrating anniversaries and business deals. The shoebox felt heavier with each step. Dad saw me first. His face lit up with genuine surprise and joy, the way it used to when I was little, and would run to greet him after work. Faith, sweetheart, you made it. Alexandra looked up from her phone, her mouth falling open. Oh my God, Faith! What are you doing here? Mom turned in her chair, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw fear flicker across her features before the practiced smile snapped back into place. Faith, darling, what a wonderful surprise. I approached the table slowly, the shoebox cradled in my arms like an offering. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder. Dad stood up to hug me, and I let him. He smelled like the same cologne he'd worn my entire childhood, and for a second I almost lost my nerve. You look incredible, he said, holding me at arm's length. So grown up, so successful. Thanks, Dad. Alexandra was still staring. I can't believe you're here. Mom said you were traveling, working abroad or something. Did she? I looked directly at Mom, who was gripping her wine glass like a lifeline. That's interesting. What else has Mom told you about me? Faith, honey, let's not... Mom started. Actually, let's. I set the shoebox on the table with deliberate care. I brought you a birthday present, Mom. Something I've been working on for a very long time. The restaurant continued buzzing around us, other diners unaware that they were about to witness a family's destruction. Grandma Vienna caught my eye from across the room and gave me the smallest nod. It was time. Open it, I said, my voice cutting through the restaurant's gentle hum. Mom's hands trembled as she lifted the lid. The cash sat there like an accusation, neat stacks bound with rubber bands. Her wine glass slipped from her fingers, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like spilled blood. Dad choked on his drink, coughing violently. Faith, what is this? $48,000, I announced, loud enough for neighboring tables to hear. Every penny she stole from my college fund when I was 17. That's not... I would never... Mom stammered, but her face had gone pale beneath her foundation. Alexandra's mouth fell open. What are you talking about? I pulled out the manila envelope, spreading documents across the table like evidence at a trial. Forged withdrawal slips, bank statements, credit card applications she filled out in my name. 4 years of fraud, all documented. Faith, please, you're making a scene, Mom whispered, glancing around at the other diners who were starting to stare. Good. You made me a scene when you told everyone I was a college dropout, when you let me struggle with debt while you paraded around in your new body. Dad grabbed one of the bank statements, his face crumpling as he read. Trisha, tell me this isn't true. Arthur, she's obviously having some kind of breakdown. The signatures, I interrupted, pointing to the withdrawal slips. Look at them, Dad. That's not my handwriting. She forged my name 17 different times. Grandma Vienna's phone was up now, recording everything. Other diners had stopped pretending not to listen. And here's the best part, I continued, pulling out the surveillance photos. Meet Dr. Townsend, Mom's plastic surgeon, also her boyfriend for the past 2 years. The photos scattered across the table, Mom and the silver-haired doctor holding hands, kissing in his car, entering hotels together. Dad stared at the images like he was seeing his own death certificate. Trisha? Those are fake. She hired someone to what? Follow you around for months? Document your affair with the man you paid with my college money? Alexandra was crying now, mascara streaming down her cheeks. Mom, how could you do this? I didn't do anything. Your sister is sick. She's obsessed. $8,000, I said, turning to Alexandra. That's how much she's already taken from your college fund. Small amounts so you wouldn't notice. Alexandra's face went white. What? I pulled out her bank statements, started 6 months ago. Same pattern as mine. She's doing it again, Alex. No, that's impossible. Mom would never. Check your account, right now. Log in and check. Alexandra fumbled for her phone with shaking hands. The table fell silent, except for the sound of her fingers tapping the screen. Her face crumpled as she read. Oh God, it's true. Dad was reading through the credit reports now, his face getting redder with each page. 12,000 in debt? In Faith's name? Trisha, what the hell have you done? I was protecting this family! Mom finally exploded, standing up so fast her chair toppled backward. Do you think success just happens? Do you think people respect you when you look ordinary? So you stole from your own children. I invested in our future, in our image. A beautiful mother reflects well on the whole family. The restaurant had gone completely quiet. Every eye was on our table. You destroyed my future, I said, standing to face her. You humiliated me, made me look like a failure who couldn't even get into college. You were always so ungrateful. Everything I did was for you. For me, you spent my money on breast implants. To be a better mother, to be someone you could be proud of. I was proud of you, before you became this. I gestured at her surgically altered face. Before you became a thief and a liar and a cheat. Mom lunged across the table, trying to grab the photos. You little bitch! You've ruined everything! Dad caught her arm. Trisha, stop! Just stop! She whirled on him. Don't you dare take her side! She's trying to destroy our family! Our family? Dad's voice was deadly quiet. What family? You've been stealing from our children and cheating on me for years. What family is left? Grandma Vienna stood up from her table, phone still recording. Excuse me, everyone. I'm Trisha's mother, and I want you all to know, my daughter is a thief and a liar who stole her own child's future. Mother, sit down! I will not. I raised you better than this, Trisha, and now the whole world is going to know what you really are. She held up her phone. This is going straight to Facebook. Let's see how your book club friends feel about your family values now. Mom looked around the restaurant wildly, realizing her perfect public image was crumbling in real time. Other diners were pulling out their phones, recording the scene. You can't do this to me, she whispered. I'm your mother. You stopped being my mother the day you chose vanity over your own daughter's future. I picked up the shoebox, now empty except for my note. For services unrendered, Mom. I'll never let you rob another daughter again. Mom's face contorted with rage and desperation. You think you've won? You think this makes you better than me? No, I said quietly. It makes us even. She clutched her chest suddenly, her face going grey. I can't breathe. Mom! Alexandra jumped up as Mom swayed on her feet. Call 911! Dad shouted as Mom collapsed, hitting the floor with a sickening thud. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Sirens wailed in the distance. And I stood there, watching my mother writhe on the floor, wondering if revenge was supposed to feel this empty. Mom survived the panic attack, but everything else died that night. The paramedics wheeled her out on a stretcher, while restaurant patrons filmed with their phones. By morning, Grandma Vienna's Facebook video had been shared 3,000 times. The local news picked it up by afternoon. Tech entrepreneur exposes mother's theft at birthday dinner ran on every station in the city. Dad filed for separation the next week. He showed up at my apartment with divorce papers already drawn up and a check for $12,000. For the credit card debt, he said, unable to meet my eyes. I should have known. I should have protected you. Dad. No, Faith. I failed you. I was so busy avoiding conflict that I let her destroy my own daughter's future. He looked older, grayer, like he'd aged 5 years in 5 days. She's staying with Dr. Townsend now. Apparently they've been planning this for months. The affair, the divorce, taking half of everything. I'm sorry. Don't be. You did what I should have done years ago. The Financial Crimes Unit opened an investigation. Mom's lawyer tried to claim the college fund was family money, but the forged signatures were too obvious. She pled guilty to avoid jail time, agreeing to pay restitution and perform community service. The hardest part was Alexandra. She showed up at my door 3 weeks after the dinner, her eyes red from crying. "I hate you," she said without preamble. "I know. You destroyed our family. Mom's a wreck. Dad won't talk to anyone. Everything's ruined." "It was already ruined, Alex. I just made it visible." "She loved us. She made mistakes, but she loved us." "She stole from both of us. She was cheating on Dad. She was planning to leave him anyway." Alexandra slumped against my doorframe. "I don't know what's real anymore. My whole life feels like a lie." "Not your whole life, just the parts she controlled." I let her cry on my couch for 2 hours, then made her favorite grilled cheese sandwiches the way Grandma Vienna used to make them. We didn't talk much, but she didn't leave. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "Now you finish college with your own money, in your own name. You make your own choices instead of trying to please someone who is never going to be satisfied." "I don't know how to do that." "Neither did I. But you figure it out." She stayed for dinner, then came back the next weekend, and the one after that. Slowly, carefully, we started building something that felt like sisterhood. Grandma Vienna moved in with Dad temporarily, helping him sort through 23 years of marriage and lies. She found hidden bank accounts, secret credit cards, receipts for things Mom had bought and hidden. "Your mother was planning to take everything," she told me over coffee one morning. "The house, the retirement accounts, even your father's business investments. She had lawyers, financial advisors, the whole setup. But now? Now she gets nothing. Fraud voids the prenup. Your father's keeping everything, and she's facing bankruptcy." I should have felt satisfied. Instead, I felt hollow. Caden called me every day that first month, checking in. "You okay?" he asked during one of our video chats. "I got what I wanted. Justice, exposure, consequences." "That's not what I asked." I stared at my reflection in the laptop screen. Successful, independent, completely alone. I keep thinking about that photo on Grandma's mantle. Mom at 18, before she became this. She looked so hopeful, so normal. People make choices, Faith. You didn't make hers for her. I know, but I wonder sometimes if there was another way. There wasn't. You tried talking to her when you were 17. She hit you and threatened you. Some people only understand consequences. The business kept growing. We landed a contract with a major retail chain, then another with a restaurant group. I hired employees, rented office space, started speaking at conferences about entrepreneurship and overcoming adversity. But I never talked about my family. Alexandra graduated with honors and got accepted to law school. She sent me a photo of herself at commencement, smiling genuinely for the first time in months. "Thank you," she texted, "for saving me from becoming her." Dad started dating his accountant, a kind woman named Patricia, who made him laugh again. He seemed lighter, younger, like he'd been holding his breath for 20 years and could finally exhale. Mom tried to contact me once, through a lawyer. She wanted to reconcile and move past this unfortunate misunderstanding. I had my own lawyer send back a single sentence. Any further contact will be considered harassment. The day I signed the lease on QuickShift's new headquarters, I found myself standing in the empty office space, thinking about 17-year-old me crying over those bank statements. She couldn't have imagined this. The success, the independence, the family slowly healing around the wound Mom had left. My phone buzzed with a text from Caden. "Proud of you. Ready for that European expansion now? I typed back. Ready. Because I was. Ready to build something bigger than revenge. Ready to help other people the way I'd wished someone would help me. Ready to make sure the cycle ended with me. For services unrendered, Mom. I'll never let you rob another daughter again. Starting with myself.
The crack came first, sharp and merciless, echoing through my ribs like a gunshot in a silent room. My breath vanished, stolen by the blunt force of wood crashing into bone. I hit the carpet hard, the taste of blood rushing into my mouth, metallic and hot. When I looked up, my sister Clara stood above me, her hands still clutching the chair legs, her chest heaving, her eyes glittering with something so cold it didn't look like anger. It looked like satisfaction. My name is Leah Armstrong, and that was the moment my life split in two. Not just my ribs, but the fragile illusion that family meant safety. I had grown up thinking if I endured enough, if I stayed quiet long enough, maybe my parents would notice me. Maybe Clara would soften. But lying on that floor, every breath a stabbing fire in my chest, I realized silence had only ever made me easier to break. I remember my father's voice from the doorway, flat and detached. Get up! No rush, no concern, just impatience, as though I'd tripped over my own clumsiness. My mother's fork clinked against a plate in the kitchen. She didn't come running. She didn't even raise her voice. Clara dropped the chair back onto the floor, like she'd just finished rearranging furniture. I tried to speak, but the words caught behind the wheeze in my throat. Pain blurred the edges of the room, darkened the corners of my vision, and yet, in that haze, something inside me settled with startling clarity. That chair hadn't only cracked my ribs, it had cracked the last thread of silence binding me to them. One day, I promised myself, I would carry the truth into a place where their excuses couldn't bury it, into a courtroom, with the x-rays in my hands. I grew up in a house that looked picture-perfect from the outside. A modest white home on a quiet street in Pennsylvania. Neighbors would wave at my parents, Harold and Diane, and comment on how lucky they were to have two daughters so close in age. From the sidewalk, everything looked neat, ordinary, even enviable. But the truth was quieter, hidden in the way our walls seemed to bend around my sister Clara, as though the whole structure leaned toward her. Clara was 2 years older, and from the moment she could talk, her voice filled every corner. My parents hung on her stories as if they were gospel. If she drew a crooked star on a piece of paper, it went straight to the refrigerator door. If I brought home an A on a test, it might get a glance before disappearing into the pile of mail on the counter. I used to tell myself they loved me too, just differently. But even as a child, I felt the sharp edges of being invisible. The imbalance didn't stop with praise. Clara's moods ruled our house. If she laughed, everyone relaxed. If she sulked, the air thickened. And if she was angry, it meant trouble for me. I remember being shoved into a wall for refusing to lend her a sweater, her nails digging into my arm hard enough to leave red crescents. My parents called it sibling rivalry, told me to toughen up. They never saw how her eyes lingered on me afterward, daring me to complain, daring me to break the silence. By the time I was 10, I had learned to make myself small. I read quietly in my room, slipped out of the way when Clara stormed through the hallway, and learned that invisibility was safer than attention. Still, I kept trying to earn some measure of approval. In 5th grade, I spent weeks on a diorama for the school fair, cutting tiny cardboard walls and painting every detail. When it won first prize, I carried the ribbon home like a treasure. My mother looked at it, smiled faintly, then turned to cheer as Clara wobbled down the driveway on her bike without training wheels. That image burned into me, my moment swallowed whole by hers. Even then, I told myself it was normal. That's what families did, lift one child higher. Let the other make do with shadows. But the shadows grew heavier with each passing year, and I carried them like a second skin. As I grew older, Clara's temper sharpened into something less like sibling mischief and more like a weapon. It wasn't just slammed doors or shouting matches, it was the sudden shove against a countertop, the twist of my wrist when I refused to hand over the TV remote, the sting of a slap when I dared to argue back. Each time, I would swallow the ache, press ice to a bruise, and tell myself it was easier to endure than to fight. My parents never asked questions. They didn't want answers. When I was 12, Clara caught me writing in my diary. She demanded to read it, convinced that even my private thoughts belonged to her. When I refused, she slammed my door so hard the mirror cracked and fell to the floor. Shards scattered across my carpet like glittering teeth. My father poked his head in, took one look at the mess, and told me to clean it up. Clara walked away smiling. That was the first time I realized destruction could feel like power to her. And silence was the gift our parents kept handing her. In high school, the imbalance only deepened. Clara wasn't remarkable in grades, but she was magnetic. She had friends who orbited her the way I once did, laughing at her jokes, following her moods. At home, she strutted through weekends filled with cheer competitions and parties. My parents were always in the stands, clapping the loudest. Meanwhile, I carried debate trophies home alone, placing them on my shelf without an audience. The bruises became easier to hide beneath long sleeves, but not from my best friend Nora. She'd catch my sleeve sliding back, eyes narrowing at the yellowing mark beneath. Did she do that again? She would whisper. But I never answered. Admitting it felt dangerous, like handing over evidence that might explode my whole world. By the time I turned 16, Clara's violence had almost become predictable, a cycle that crested whenever she felt overlooked. If she misplaced her phone, I was accused of stealing it. If she wanted something I had, it was hers by force. And still, my parents brushed it off, telling me not to exaggerate. What I didn't understand then was that each bruise, each dismissal, was a rehearsal. Clara was learning that hurting me came without consequence, and I was learning, piece by piece, how much it cost to stay quiet. Leaving for college felt like stepping into air that finally belonged to me. The campus was 2 hours away, just far enough that I could breathe without waiting for Clara's shadow to fall across me. I worked part-time at the library, saved every extra dollar, and for the first time, I felt the faint hum of independence in my chest. Phone calls home were short. My mother always asked about Clara, first how she was doing, what she needed before half-heartedly asking about me. I learned to keep my answers brief, to protect the fragile piece of distance. After graduation, I found a steady job at a community library and, after years of careful budgeting, scraped together a down payment for a modest condo. It wasn't much 2 bedrooms, old carpet, creaky windows, but it was mine. Walking through the doorway that first day, carrying only a couple of boxes, I thought this is the place where silence will finally mean peace, not punishment. When Clara found out, her reaction was instant. She called, her voice sharp with entitlement, announcing that she'd move into the second bedroom until she got back on her feet. I told her gently that the room was meant to be a workspace and occasional guest room. The pause on the line stretched. Then her voice went cold. She hung up without saying goodbye. Within days, my father phoned, trying to guilt me. Family helps family. Leah, you've got space. She doesn't. My refusal hardened something between us. Soon my mother joined in, dropping comments about how selfish I was, how it must be nice to have so much room just for myself. I held my ground, though every call left me rattled. I thought maybe the storm would pass if I stayed quiet. But with Clara, storms never passed, they gathered strength. And I could feel this one building, waiting for its moment to break. My mother's birthday dinner should have been a simple family gathering, but the moment I walked through the door, I felt the air tighten. Clara was already seated at the head of the table, laughing too loudly, her wine glass in hand like she owned the night. My parents hovered close, basking in her glow, while I slipped into my seat with the same quiet caution I had carried my whole life. At first, the meal moved along politely, small talk floating above the clatter of silverware. I tried to convince myself I could survive the evening without incident. But midway through dessert, Clara set her fork down with deliberate grace and turned the conversation like a knife. So, Leah, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, still guarding that empty bedroom like its Fort Knox laughter bubbled from my father, though it didn't reach his eyes. My mother gave a little sigh, as though Clara had merely pointed out the obvious. I swallowed hard, pulse thudding in my throat. It's my home, I said evenly, and I've made my decision about who lives there. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the clink of my mother's fork. Clara's smile collapsed into a hard, flat stare I knew too well. So you'd rather see your own sister struggle than share a little space? Her tone sharpened, accusing, daring me to retreat. But I didn't. For once. I didn't. I worked for that condo, I said, and I'm not responsible for fixing your life. Something in the room shifted. My father leaned back, jaw tight. My mother avoided my eyes. And Clara pushed her chair back slowly, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the arms. I thought she might storm out. Instead, she stood, reached for the nearest wooden chair, and lifted it with deliberate calm. The scrape of its legs on the floor was the prelude, and my heart clenched with the certainty that the storm I had feared was finally here. Time seemed to stretch thin in that moment, every detail carved sharply into my memory, the veins standing out on Clara's hands as she lifted the chair, the flicker of rage hardening her face, the way my parents stayed seated, frozen, as if waiting to see which way the evening would tilt. I opened my mouth to tell her to put it down, but the words never made it past my lips. The chair swung in a swift arc, striking deep into my left side. The sound was sickening, a crack that reverberated through my bones, as if the world itself had snapped in half. Pain exploded white-hot, stealing my breath. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the carpet, clutching my ribs in a futile attempt to hold them together. Clara's voice cut through the haze, low and cruel. "That's what you get for talking back," I gasped, desperate for air, the metallic taste of blood flooding my mouth. My vision blurred at the edges, and still I turned toward my parents. Surely this would break through their indifference. But my father sat back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression one of irritation rather than alarm. My mother's eyes darted between us, calculation flickering there instead of concern. "Call an ambulance," I managed to rasp. My father shook his head. "You'll be fine. Stop being dramatic." The absurdity of his words almost outstripped the agony. But then another wave of pain hit, and I could barely think. My mother finally rose, muttering, "Maybe urgent care," as though I had ruined her evening by daring to be hurt. Clara had already sat back down, calmly resuming her cake as if she hadn't just broken me in half. The drive to the clinic was silent, broken only by my ragged breaths and the thud of each bump against my ribs. When the doctor confirmed 2 fractures, his voice was firm, clinical. "You're lucky the lung wasn't punctured." Lucky. That was the word he used. But lying there, wrapped in bandages, watching my parents pretend nothing had happened, I realized luck had nothing to do with survival. Silence had been killing me all along. The night after the assault, I lay propped against pillows in my condo, every breath a stab of fire. The bruises along my ribs had already begun to bloom, purple and black, spreading like ink beneath my skin. I stared at the ceiling, my mind looping over the moment Clara's voice cut cold through the pain. "That's what you get for talking back." For years, I had convinced myself that silence was survival, that if I endured, the storms would pass. But the chair had changed everything. This wasn't a shove in the hallway or a twisted wrist during an argument. This was calculated, deliberate harm, and my body carried the proof. If I stayed quiet now, I was telling all of them, Clara, my parents, even myself, that I deserved it. The next morning, My best friend Nora arrived with groceries and a look of fury in her eyes. When she saw the bruising, she whispered, "Leah, this isn't sibling drama. This is assault." She pressed the envelope of medical records into my hands, her voice steady. "You have evidence. Don't let them bury this." That night, I sat with my laptop open, scrolling through Pennsylvania's assault laws. Words like serious bodily harm and domestic violence statutes stared back at me. 2 broken ribs. It qualified. I felt the weight of it pressing down, fear mixing with a strange, trembling clarity. I knew what my parents would say. They would defend Clara. They would call me dramatic, selfish, disloyal. But loyalty had cost me enough. Loyalty had broken my bones. Nora found me a lawyer, Mark Jensen, a man who specialized in cases like mine. Sitting in his office a week later, I laid out the x-rays, the photos of my injuries, the hospital report. He studied them carefully, then looked at me with a kind of gravity I hadn't expected. "This isn't a family squabble," he said. "This is aggravated assault, and you have a strong case." My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. "Then I want to file." The decision felt like cutting a final thread. Terrifying, yes, but also freeing. For the first time, silence wasn't my only choice. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polished floors, the air humming with low voices that rose and fell like background static. My palms were damp as I gripped the folder of evidence x-rays, medical notes, photographs of bruises. Each step down the marble corridor echoed louder than it should have, steady and deliberate, as if I were reminding myself I had the right to be here. When the bailiff called our case, my chest tightened. Clara entered flanked by my parents, her chin high, her smile practiced. My mother avoided my eyes. My father gave me a look that was equal parts warning and dismissal. For a heartbeat, the old fear stirred. But then Mark Jensen leaned close and whispered, "They don't control this room." "You do." The judge asked if we were ready to proceed. Mark stood, presenting the x-rays first. When the images lit up on the screen, the room shifted. Clara's smirk faltered. My father's jaw clenched. Mark described the fractures, the force needed to cause them, tying every word to the reality of what Clara had done. Then it was my turn. I rose, knees trembling, but my voice stayed steady. I told the story not embellished, not softened. I described the birthday dinner, the scrape of the chair against the floor, the pain that followed. I spoke of my parents' indifference, the way Clara sat back down to eat cake while I gasped for air. Clara's lawyer tried to twist it, suggesting maybe I had fallen, that perhaps I was exaggerating. But every time, I returned to the same truth. She lifted the chair, she struck me, and I have the x-rays to prove it. By the time we finished, the judge's expression had sharpened. Thoughtful, but firm. She didn't give a verdict that day, saying she would review the evidence and deliver her decision the following week. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt drained, like every ounce of energy had been wrung from me. But beneath the exhaustion, there was something else, a flicker of triumph, small but undeniable. For the first time in my life, my voice had filled a room my parents couldn't silence. The morning of the verdict, I dressed simply navy blazer, hair pulled back, wanting nothing that could be mistaken for performance. When the judge entered and began recapping the case, my heart pounded so hard I thought it might echo off the walls. Then came the words I had carried in my dreams. "The court finds that you did intentionally strike your sister, causing 2 fractured ribs." Clara's face drained of color. My father muttered something under his breath. My mother stared down at her lap. The judge handed down community service, fines, and a restraining order forbidding Clara from contacting me for 3 years. It wasn't prison, but it was official, undeniable, a mark on the record that could never be erased. Outside, the air felt lighter than it had in years. Reporters asked if I wanted to comment, but I only said, "Sometimes you have to stand up, even if it means standing alone." Then I walked away, my steps steady. In the weeks that followed, The silence from my family was deafening, but it no longer felt like a void. It felt like freedom. I filled that silence with people who cared Nora with her steady presence, neighbors who checked in, co-workers who offered quiet support. My ribs healed slowly, but the deeper wounds the years of invisibility began to close too. I keep the x-rays in a box in my closet, not as a wound, but as a symbol. They remind me that the truth, once spoken, cannot be buried. My sister broke my ribs with a chair, but in court, I broke the silence that had been breaking me all along. Someone had chilled champagne for Sunday dinner, which told me this wasn't a meal, it was a presentation. I'm Aurora Stone, a real estate agent who sells other people their fresh starts. That night, I set a bottle of Cabernet on my parents' table and read the room the way I read a showing the new linen runner. The two sunny smiles, my brother's shirt ironed for the first time in months. Everyone looked ready to sign papers I'd never seen. Dad cleared his throat. Fork balanced over his plate. Mom's hand rested on Kyle's wrist like an endorsement. He lifted a flute and said, confident as a man who's never had to move himself, starting next week, I'll stay at Aurora's place just until work settles. It's better for the family. The word family slid across the table like a deed without my name. I felt the familiar heat at the base of my neck, the heat of every time I paid my own bills while Kyle's were forgiven, of every boundary treated as a suggestion. I watched the bubbles climb in his glass and thought how quickly they vanish. I smiled, not the smile from an open house, welcoming and soft, but the one I keep for moments when people mistake my silence for consent. I folded my napkin, returned it to my lap, and let the room quiet. In my line of work, closings happen long before the day you pick up the keys. Decisions are made in private, quietly, definitively. I had come to dinner with more than wine. I had come with a decision that didn't require a vote. Let's eat while it's hot, I said, steady and polite, and slipped an envelope from my bag to the side of my plate, just inside my reach, just outside theirs. Tonight. When people ask where I learned to stand on my own, I think back to a summer afternoon in middle school, when I was mowing lawns in the thick heat, while Kyle sat in the shade with a soda my mother had handed him. I wanted a pair of sneakers that cost more than our allowance would cover. So I pushed that mower across every neighbor's yard until I had the money. Kyle wanted the same shoes, and 2 days later, my parents bought them outright, saying, he's sensitive. Aurora, he needs encouragement. That word sensitive was the shield that covered every one of his shortcomings. It wasn't that I didn't love my brother. I did. But love doesn't erase the memory of watching someone get rescued before consequences even touched them. By high school, the pattern was burned into me. When I asked to work part-time at a bakery to save for a laptop, my mom said she was proud of my independence. I'd come home with my hair smelling like sugar and butter, exhausted but proud. The next year, Kyle asked for the newest phone, and my father bought it for him so he could stay in touch. I stayed quiet, knowing if I asked for the same, I'd be told to keep saving. College made the contrast even starker. I attended a state university, balancing classes with shifts at the registrar's office, piecing together scholarships and loans. My parents said I was capable, that I'd manage. Kyle enrolled at a private college in California, every cost covered without hesitation. He dropped out after 2 years, saying he hadn't found his passion, and came back home with little more than stories of parties and debt my parents quietly erased. By then, the roles were set in stone. I was the child who didn't need help, and Kyle was the one whose struggles demanded constant rescue. I told myself it didn't matter, that all the long nights and scraped knuckles of work would eventually give me something no one could take away: freedom. But under that determination sat a coal that never cooled, a quiet resentment that glowed hotter each time I heard my mother sigh. Family has to help each other, as if I hadn't been left to help myself all along. That coal would follow me into adulthood, glowing in every decision, every sacrifice, and it was waiting to spark when the word family was used as leverage at my own dinner table. Adulthood didn't smooth the edges between us. It sharpened them. After graduation, I took the first job that would have me a junior assistant at a small real estate office in Denver. My desk was shoved into a corner by the copy machine, and my days were filled with stapling contracts, answering phones, and fetching coffee. But every hour mattered. I kept a little notebook where I tracked commissions I wasn't even eligible for yet, promising myself one day those numbers would be mine. While I learned the grind of cold calls and open houses, Kyle floated from one odd job to another. Bartending, dog walking, delivering packages each lasted weeks before he found a reason to quit. The manager was unfair. The hours were brutal. It just wasn't for me. He'd say those words with a shrug, already confident that the safety net below him would hold, and it always did. When his rent was late, Dad wrote the check. When his car sputtered, Mom covered the repair. Sometimes they didn't even wait for him to ask. They stepped in before consequences had the chance to teach. For me, there was no net. When my old sedan broke down during my second year at the agency, I rode the bus for months, balancing my laptop bag on my knees while sweat stuck my blouse to the seat. I remember standing in the heat at a bus stop, watching a brand new pickup roll past the one my parents had just bought for Kyle after he complained about his used car. That was the day I understood I'd never be measured by the same standard. Still, I pressed on. Within 5 years, I moved from the assistant's desk to my own listings. I spent weekends staging homes, scrubbing counters, and arranging flowers just right, because I couldn't afford to hire help. I lived lean, no fancy vacations, no impulse splurges, because every dollar had a purpose. It went to debt, to savings, to the future I refused to let slip away. And with each small win, each client who shook my hand and signed on the dotted line, I felt that coal of resentment shift, not extinguished, but repurposed into fuel. If no one else was going to carry me, I'd build the kind of life no one could claim credit for. Or so I thought. 8 years into the grind, I finally touched the dream I'd been chasing. It wasn't a mansion, not even close. But when I stood on the porch of a modest ranch-style home on the edge of Denver, I felt like I'd arrived somewhere sacred. 3 bedrooms, a small yard with space for lavender and maybe a dog. Sunlight spilling through the living room windows. It was mine. Every commission, every sleepless night with spreadsheets spread across my kitchen table, had led to this moment. The day I closed, I left the title office with the keys clutched so tightly my fingers ached. My parents came by with a housewarming plant, smiling like they'd always believed in me. Kyle arrived hours late, carrying nothing but a half-empty soda and a complaint about his latest breakup. He wandered through the rooms as if inspecting them, then leaned against the back door and said, "You've got space to spare. I could use a change of scenery. Maybe I'll crash here for a while." I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke, but his stare stayed steady, as if my home was already his next landing pad. I brushed it off, telling him I wasn't ready for guests. Later that night, my mother called, her tone gentle but firm. "Aurora, he just needs a little support. Family helps family. Don't be so rigid." I stood in my kitchen, boxes still stacked against the walls, and felt the unease creep in. For me, this house represented freedom. For them, it was simply an extension of the safety net they'd always spread under Kyle. And I realized with a jolt that my victory wasn't safe from the same pattern that had shadowed me since childhood. The walls I'd painted, the mortgage I'd signed, they were mine on paper. But in my family's eyes, they were still negotiable. It didn't take long for the hints to turn into expectations. Kyle stopped by more often, never with groceries or a tool in hand, always with suggestions. He'd drop into a chair, glance around like he was measuring the space, and say things like, "This backyard would be perfect for a party. I'll invite the crew. You won't even have to lift a finger." When I told him no, he rolled his eyes as if I were being selfish, as if my refusal to host his chaos was some personal insult. Soon my parents joined the chorus. Mom would call in the evenings, her voice dripping with that particular brand of guilt. It's just for a little while. Aurora! He needs stability. You've always been the strong one. Dad chimed in too, reminding me how families pull together in hard times. Each conversation left me pacing my kitchen, staring at the walls I'd only just painted, wondering how long it would be before I was boxed out of my own sanctuary. What stung wasn't only the pressure, it was the assumption. They spoke as if my consent were a formality, as though the space I had fought for was theirs to allocate. Every boundary I tried to draw was softened by their refrain. Don't be so rigid. Don't be so cold. I wanted to shout that rigidity was the only thing that had kept me afloat all these years. That without it, I'd have collapsed under the weight of doing everything alone. One Saturday, Kyle texted that he and a few friends would come by early that evening. Mom says you won't mind, he added. Like the matter was settled, I locked my doors, closed the curtains, and sat in silence, heart thudding with anger I didn't want to show. That night, no one came, but I knew it wasn't over. In their eyes, my independence was a resource to be tapped, not a right to be respected, and I could already feel the storm gathering. The storm broke in ways I didn't expect. At first, it was a steady drip under the kitchen sink. I called a plumber, thinking it would be a simple fix. But when he crouched beneath the cabinet and shined his light, his face shifted. The entire water system was corroded, he said, and if I didn't replace it soon, I risked a burst pipe flooding the house, $6,000. I swallowed hard, wrote the check from my emergency fund, and told myself it was handled. Weeks later, Denver's spring rains swept in, and with them, a new nightmare. Brown spots bloomed on the ceiling. A roofer climbed up, inspected for half an hour, then delivered his verdict, a full replacement, at least $11,000. I leaned against the porch railing, listening to the rain patter, and felt my dream house transform into a burden I could barely carry. As a real estate agent, I knew the market was hot. Homes in my neighborhood were selling within days, some for well over asking. Clients I'd once advised to hold out were now cashing in. And there I was, clinging to a house that seemed intent on draining me dry. The thought of selling gutted me. This home was supposed to be my proof, my sanctuary. But each new repair tightened a noose around my finances. I called my financial advisor, Emily, and poured it all out. She listened quietly, then said, Aurora, you've always been practical with clients. Be practical with yourself. Sell while the market's high. Protect your future. Her words stung because they were true. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the light stretching across the floorboards, and realized I faced a choice: hold on until the house dragged me under, or let go before I lost more than money. It wasn't failure, it was survival. And for once, I needed to choose myself. Sunday dinners had always been a ritual in our family, no matter how tense the week. 6 o'clock meant we sat down together at my parents' table. That evening, though, something felt staged the moment I walked in. The tablecloth was crisp and new, silverware polished until it gleamed, and in the center sat a bottle of champagne, beads of condensation running down the glass. My mother's smile was too bright, my father's posture too formal. Kyle appeared from the living room in a pressed shirt, carrying himself as if he were about to give a speech. He set a gift bag on the table, looked around at us, and lifted his glass. I've made a decision, he announced, like the family CEO. Starting next week, I'll be moving in with Aurora, just until I get settled again. My fork stilled over my plate. For a moment, I wondered if I'd misheard. But then Mom nodded eagerly, adding, It makes perfect sense. Aurora has the space, and it's wasteful for her to live there alone. Dad cleared his throat, calling it a solution for everyone. Their words slid across the table like signatures on a contract drafted without me. I felt the familiar burn at the back of my neck, the echo of every time my sacrifices were treated as communal property. The difference was, this time I had come prepared. I placed my napkin neatly beside my plate, reached into my bag, and set an envelope on the table. My voice was calm, almost too calm. That's a thoughtful plan. But there's one small problem. Silence spread like a ripple. My father frowned. What problem? I tapped the envelope. The house isn't mine to share anymore. I sold it last week. The room froze. Kyle blinked as if trying to restart a stalled engine. Mom's glass hit the table with a sharp clink. Dad's jaw tightened. You what? Mom demanded, her voice cracking between disbelief and accusation. I slid the envelope toward them. The papers are signed. Ownership transfers in 3 weeks. I'll be renting a smaller place that fits my budget. The air thickened. Kyle flipped through the documents like he might find a loophole. His face flushed, then hardened. You did this just to cut me off. No, I said evenly. I did this to keep from drowning in debt. The champagne sat untouched, bubbles dying as quickly as their plan had. Kyle shoved the papers back toward me, his chair scraping loud against the floor. You always think you're smarter than everyone, he snapped, his voice shaking with anger. I already told my landlord I was moving out. Where am I supposed to go now? I held his stare. That's not my responsibility. Kyle, you can rent another place, find a roommate, or stay with Mom and Dad, just like I once had to figure it out on my own. My mother bristled, clutching her napkin like it was an anchor. Aurora, he'll have nowhere to stay. You're being cruel. I let out a bitter laugh. Cruel when I was 19, riding the bus in the middle of winter because my car broke down. No one called that cruel. I worked 2 jobs to keep my tuition paid. Meanwhile, Kyle made 1 phone call and got a brand new truck. If protecting what I've worked for makes me selfish, then so be it. Dad leaned forward, his tone heavy. We're family. When one of us struggles, we all share the burden. I met his eyes. Sharing the burden doesn't mean turning my home into a permanent rescue station. Helping someone should teach them to stand on their own, not keep them dependent forever. Kyle barked a sharp laugh. Listen to you, like you're some therapist. You just don't want to share because you're greedy. My voice stayed steady. I've shared my whole life. What I won't share anymore is my freedom. The room went still. My parents exchanged uneasy glances, their polished dinner turning sour. Kyle stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glasses. For the first time in years, I didn't chase after him, didn't soften the edges. I stayed in my chair, the envelope still on the table, and felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, not relief, just certainty. I had drawn the line, and no amount of guilt or shouting would erase it. But I also knew this wasn't the end. Families like mine didn't give up control easily, and Kyle wasn't the type to surrender quietly. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Kyle didn't call, but word reached me through Mom he had dragged his bags back into their house, grumbling the whole way. I braced myself for the usual cycle, him sleeping until noon, my parents covering every bill, everyone pretending it was temporary. But something shifted this time. Dad drew up rules, real ones, and taped them to the fridge. Kyle would pay a set amount for rent, mow the lawn, and buy his own groceries. Mom didn't rush to rescue him either. When he skipped chores, they deducted money. When he came home late, Dad locked the door. I stayed out of it, watching from a distance, but I couldn't deny a strange sense of relief. For once, it wasn't me carrying the weight of being the strong one. Kyle grumbled, but slowly, he started to adapt. He picked up a part-time job at a garage, then another at a warehouse. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his. Meanwhile, I settled into a smaller townhouse across town, manageable and bright, with just enough space for me and the peace I had long craved. No leaks, no crumbling roof, just walls that belonged only to me. Weeks later, Kyle surprised me with a call. His voice lacked the usual edge. I just signed the lease on my own place. No co-sign from Mom and Dad. I did it myself. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then I smiled, because I finally believed him. Looking back, I understood something simple but hard-earned: drawing boundaries doesn't destroy a family. It can save it. My house had been more than bricks and beams. It was proof that my choices mattered. By refusing to surrender it, I forced everyone else to face theirs. And in that space, we all began to change. My name is Lillian Harper, and the first thing I saw when I turned onto Sycamore Lane was a row of black garbage bags lined up along our front fence like a parade of bad decisions. One had split open my work jeans and a dog-eared sketchbook spilling into the grass. The porch light was on. The camera light was brighter. My mother stood at the top step holding her phone at eye level, chin angled like she'd practiced. Beside her, my sister Brittany extended an arm and addressed an audience I couldn't see. "Here she is," Brittany said, voice syrupy and sharp, back from another trip, still refusing to pay rent. "Watch and learn, people." I left the engine running and stepped out anyway. The air smelled like damp cedar and gasoline. Somewhere down the block, a screen door creaked and didn't close. My gaming monitor leaned against the mailbox without a box, a thin scratch across the glass catching the porch light. My duffel sat upright, zipper half open, welding visor peeking out like a tongue. "Lillian!" my mother called, not looking at me so much as aiming past me, toward the lens. This is what happens when you take advantage of your family. The word advantage caught in my throat like a chip of ice. I crouched to scoop up the sketchbook and a fistful of t-shirts, brushing off wet leaves. A sock stuck to my palm. I peeled it away and set it gently on top of the pile in the trunk. Brittany narrated each movement as if she were unboxing a blender. Across the street, Mr. Klein pretended to water his geraniums in the dark. "Say something," Brittany urged. "Tell them why you think you don't owe a dime." I closed the trunk softly. The click felt louder than it should have. My father pushed through the storm door, keys pinched between two fingers like a citation. They arced toward me and hit the gravel with a dull metallic thud. "Take your junk and go," he said. "Adults pay their way." I bent, picked up the keys, and stood. I met the camera first, then my mother's eyes, then Brittany's. I didn't give them a scene. I gave them a sentence. "You'll hear from me," I said, but not here. I slid into the driver's seat, shifted into drive, and let the porch light shrink in the rear view until it was only glare. 3 days before that night, the kitchen smelled like bacon and oversteeped coffee. My mother had already set out 2 plates, one at her spot by the window, the other across from it where I used to sit before school. The eggs were sunny side up, toast balanced at a neat angle, a smear of hot sauce waiting in a shallow dish exactly how she made them when I was 17 and rushing out the door for welding practice. I wanted to believe it meant something, that maybe we'd turned a corner. "I'll only be gone 2 days, I said, sliding into the chair. "Just a maintenance contract at the mill in Brookfield." But Monday, I paused, hoping she'd look up. Monday. I start the new job. Steady hours, full benefits. I can finally pay off what I owe you. "That's good, honey," she murmured, fingers tapping at her phone. Her eyes never left the screen. I tried to keep my voice even. It's not a big company like Marrow Industries. But, She angled the phone away like she was hiding a surprise party. But I knew better. I focused on the eggs, the way the yolk bled into the toast. My chest felt tight in that familiar way, like the room was just slightly too small. She'd let me stay in the basement after the layoff, said it was temporary. I told myself I should be grateful. When I stood to rinse my plate, she looked up for the first time and said, "Drive safe, I will." She kissed my cheek, quick and cool, then folded me into a side hug that felt staged, like someone might be watching through the window. By the time I reached my car, the morning sun had stretched long shadows across the driveway. My duffel clanked with tools as I set it in the trunk, the sound sharp in the quiet. I glanced back once and caught a flicker of movement behind the curtain, just enough to know someone was there. On the drive to Brookfield, I kept replaying her voice in my head. the way it landed without weight. We'd had years of this, her careful distance, my awkward attempts to bridge it. I told myself this job might change things, that a paycheck could fix a crack that had been there for decades. I didn't know then that by the time I came back, it wouldn't be a crack anymore. It would be an open cut, and they'd make sure the whole neighborhood saw it bleed. The job in Brookfield wrapped earlier than expected. By late afternoon on the second day, the last weld had cooled, the paperwork was signed, and I was loading my visor and gloves back into the duffel. The thought of sleeping in my own bed that night felt like a small win, enough to push me through the 2-hour drive without a coffee stop. When I turned onto our street, the first thing I saw was the mailbox, and then the row of garbage bags came into focus. Black plastic glistened under the porch light, some sagging, some split open with their contents spilling into the patchy lawn. A sweatshirt I'd had since trade school lay in the grass, sleeve tangled with the strap of my tool belt. My gaming monitor leaned at an awkward angle against the mailbox. No box, no protection. The duffel was upright but gaping, as if someone had rifled through it and stopped halfway. And then there was my mother, on the porch, holding her phone at eye level like she was filming a cooking tutorial. Beside her, Brittany stood with her arms stretched out, camera pointed straight at me, the red recording light unmistakable. "There she is!" Brittany's voice rang out, dripping with false sweetness. "Back from another business trip, still dodging rent. Folks, this is what entitlement looks like." From the corner of my eye, I saw Connor pacing near the fence, hands in his hoodie pocket, smirking like he'd been waiting for this moment. He stepped forward, kicked one of the bags so hard it slid into the flower bed, spilling books onto the mulch. Finally. My mother spoke, her tone flat but rehearsed. "Lillian Harper, living in my basement for months without paying a dime. Consider this your eviction notice." Across the street, Mrs. Klein froze mid-step with her dog's leash wrapped twice around her wrist. Mr. Klein stood in the shadows, phone lifted just high enough to record. I didn't yell. I didn't ask why. I crouched, picked up a book with a bent cover, smoothed it with my palm, and set it gently in the trunk. Brittany narrated every move, her voice a steady, grating hum. When I closed the trunk, I looked at all three of them. "Enjoy the show," I said quietly. "You'll be hearing from me soon." I had no idea how soon. I didn't drive home. I didn't even have a clear destination in mind when I pulled away from the curb. The streets blurred together gas stations, shuttered diners, the flicker of neon signs that hadn't worked right in years. By the time I stopped, I was in the corner of a grocery store parking lot, headlights off, engine idling. My hands stayed on the wheel long after the engine cooled. That's when I remembered the envelope. It had been sitting at the bottom of my filing bin for over a year. Thick cream-colored paper, with my name written in my grandfather's careful handwriting. He'd handed it to me at the hospital a few weeks before he passed, his voice thin but certain. "Don't open it unless things get bad," he'd said. I'd tucked it away, thinking I'd never need it, but sitting there, with the echo of Brittany's voice still rattling in my ears, bad felt like an understatement. I drove to Lena's apartment, the one place I knew I wouldn't have to explain myself right away. She opened the door before I even knocked twice, eyes scanning my face, then stepping aside without a word. While she made tea, I pulled my overnight bag onto the couch and dug through the side pocket until my fingers found the envelope. The paper felt heavier than I remembered. The flap sealed so clean it seemed almost deliberate. I waited until Lena had disappeared into her room before sliding my thumb under the flap. Inside was a folded letter, several notarized documents, and a crisp business card from a law firm downtown. The letter was short, written in the same neat script as my name on the front. "Lillian, if you're reading this, it means they've done what I always feared. I couldn't protect you from them while I was alive, so I'm doing it now. You own part of the house, the cabin at Echo Lake, and the workshop building on Northview Street. All legal, all documented. You don't owe them anything, not apologies, not silence, not guilt. This is for when they forget your worth. Grandpa Walter. I read it twice before opening the documents. My name was printed clearly beside percentages: 40% of the family home, 50% of the lake cabin, 35% of the commercial workshop. The business card at the bottom read Harold Pierce, Estate and Property Law. For the first time that day, I felt something steady in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but something close to it, something that felt like a way forward. The next morning, I called the number on the card. The receptionist's voice was polite but guarded until I mentioned my grandfather's name. Her tone shifted immediately, and within minutes she offered me a cancellation slot that afternoon. Harold Pierce's office was tucked into an old brick building near the courthouse, the kind of place with creaky hardwood floors and shelves lined with legal volumes. He stood when I walked in, a tall man with silver hair and the kind of handshake that spoke of habit more than enthusiasm. "You used to come with your grandfather," he said, motioning for me to sit. "Always carried that little red sketchbook." I nodded, placing the documents on his desk. He adjusted his glasses and began reading, flipping each page slowly, like the paper itself might break if rushed. The only sounds were the faint hum of traffic outside and the occasional scrape of his chair against the floor. When he looked up, his expression was measured but firm. "It's all valid. The trust was finalized before your grandfather passed. They can't sell, refinance, or collect rent without your consent." He tapped one document with the back of his pen. "If they have been collecting rent or securing loans against these properties without notifying you, that's a serious problem for them." I leaned back, letting his words settle. "What's the next step? We gather evidence. Rental agreements, loan records, bank statements. Then we decide how to proceed quietly. Or not quietly," I said. My voice surprised even me with how steady it was. He smiled faintly, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Then let's begin." That night, my phone lit up with messages, Brittany insisting the live stream was just content, my mother telling me to sign a few things and stop making this dramatic. Connor's voicemail called me immature. I forwarded every word, every missed call to Harold. By the next day, his reply was in my inbox. From this point on, all communication should go through my office. It was the first time in years I felt like I wasn't standing alone, and I intended to keep it that way. 2 days later, Harold called with the first piece of real ammunition. His voice was calm, almost casual, but the words landed like a steel beam. "Your parents and brother have been collecting rent from the lake cabin and the workshop for the last 3 years. Total owed to you just over $52,000. I closed my eyes, picturing the cabin's wide porch and the smell of pine in the summer. My grandfather had built it himself, board by board, long before I was born. They didn't even tell me it was rented." I said, "That's the point." Harold replied, "They didn't want you to know. And the loan on the workshop, if they secured it without your signature, the bank could be in trouble too." I could hear papers rustling on his end. "We'll send formal notices to their attorney and the banks today. We outline the amount owed, your ownership percentages, and make it clear you're prepared to act." That night, the silence from my family was different, not stunned or wounded, calculating. It didn't last. On the third day, I walked out of my new job during lunch to find Connor leaning against my car. His hands were in his pockets, but his posture screamed tension. "We need to talk," he said, stepping into my path. "You're trespassing," I told him. "Move. You're tearing the family apart over a technicality." He shot back, his voice low. "That money was never yours. You want to play this lawyer game. Fine. But it won't end the way you think." I didn't flinch. "Step away from my car." 2 of my co-workers appeared near the exit, calling my name. Connor glanced at them, then stepped back, muttering something I didn't catch. "This is harassment," I said, pulling out my phone. "Leave now, or I'll call security." By the time the security guard arrived, Connor was gone. I sent the parking lot footage to Harold before my shift ended. His reply came an hour later. Noted and logged. We proceed as discussed. They had made their first move. Now they would learn what it felt like to play defense. They came on a Thursday evening, just after sunset. The knock was sharp and impatient, followed by voices too many for a friendly visit. I checked the hallway camera feed on my phone before even touching the lock. All four of them stood outside. My mother clutched a tissue like a prop. My father's arms were crossed, jaw tight. Connor leaned against the wall with his usual smirk, and Brittany stood half-turned toward the door, half-turned toward her phone screen. "Lillian!" my mother called, her voice cracking just enough to sound rehearsed. "Please, honey, we just want to talk." My father stepped forward. "Open the door. You're acting like a child." From somewhere behind them, Connor muttered something I couldn't make out. Brittany kept her eyes on her phone, thumbs moving fast. I waited a beat longer than was polite, letting the quiet stretch until it felt heavy. Then, I spoke clearly, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. All future communication goes through Harold Pierce. "You've been told this." There was a pause. Then my mother again, her voice thinner now. "You don't have to do this. We can work it out, just the five of us. We'll delete the videos. We'll fix it." I watched on the feed as Brittany glanced down at her phone and tucked it behind her back. She wasn't here to fix anything. She was here for footage. "I'm not discussing anything without legal representation," I said. "If you remain here, I will call building security." My father's face darkened. "So now you're hiding behind a lawyer. You told me I wasn't your daughter. Remember that?" Connor looked away. Brittany tapped her phone again. My mother wiped her eyes, out of words. They lingered another minute before walking off in silence. As soon as the hallway was clear, I locked the deadbolt and opened my laptop. An email from Harold was waiting, subject line, settlement negotiation. Initial draft. It was only the beginning, but the sight of that file told me something had shifted. The ground under their feet wasn't as solid as they thought. 2 days later, their attorney sent Harold the first offer. They would transfer full ownership of the lake cabin to me if I agreed to drop any claim on the back rent or future income from the workshop. Harold didn't hesitate. "We reject," he wrote back, copying me on the email. "We restate our original terms. The cabin alone was worth less than a third of what they owed. They thought I'd take the bait for the sake of peace, but I wasn't interested in symbolic scraps." The cracks started to show quickly. Brittany lost thousands of followers after someone from high school posted receipts about the eviction video. Sponsors dropped her. She deleted the video. But the internet doesn't forget. My father's business stumbled too. A longtime client backed out after seeing the clip, and a loan application stalled when the bank reviewed the property documents. The trust surfaced, and with it, my name. Contact from them slowed to a trickle. An angry email from Connor that Harold forwarded without comment. 2 missed calls from Brittany I didn't answer. Silence from my mother. When their lawyer finally replied again, the tone had changed. It was cautious now, almost deferential. They agreed to every term, a formal payment plan for the back rent, a third-party property manager for all shared assets, and a written admission of financial misrepresentation signed by all 4 of them. I read the document twice before signing. Then, just above my name, I added a sentence of my own. "Truth isn't betrayal. It's what happens when the performance ends." I sent it back and waited. The legal fight was nearly over. The personal one had ended the night I closed that trunk. The apartment was small, uneven floorboards, a draft that whistled through the kitchen window, but it was mine. The lease had my name on it, and the rent came from my own paycheck. No shared spaces, no one standing at the door with a camera. 2 days after I moved in, an envelope arrived, the first payment of the back rent, paper-clipped to a note in my mother's handwriting. "We hope we can put this behind us and be a family again." I stared at it, not because it moved me, but because of how little it did. There was no apology, just the expectation I'd forget. I tucked the check into my desk drawer and went back to unpacking. Later that night, I played my grandfather's old recording. Some people only value you when they can use you. Let them call it betrayal. You just keep being you. My name is Victoria Blake, and the day I opened that thick white envelope with my parents' names stamped above mine, the hallway in my apartment went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator breathe. The paper rasped when I slid it free. Plaintiffs Martin and Della Blake, defendant Victoria Blake. My thumb left a crescent in the margin. I set the kettle back on the stove without turning on the flame, because suddenly I didn't trust myself around heat. They hadn't called. They hadn't warned me. They'd simply turned me into a case number, a neat caption for a judge who didn't know the way my mother straightens picture frames when she's about to ask for something, or how my father looks past me when the conversation turns to duty. I pressed my palm flat against the counter and read the amount, $350,000. A mortgage I didn't take. A debt I didn't make. Somewhere down the hall, my phone buzzed, but I let it ring and kept reading, because the worst part wasn't the sum. It was realizing I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their target. I didn't always know where I stood in my family, but looking back, the signs were there in ways I couldn't ignore forever. At every holiday dinner, Elise, my older sister by 3 years, sat at the center of the conversation like a chandelier, catching all the light. She was the one my parents bragged about at church, the one whose engagement photos were framed in the hallway, whose children's artwork covered the fridge. I didn't resent her for it, not exactly. But I learned early on that being compared to her was like trying to keep pace with someone on a different track entirely. While Elise was getting married at 24 and buying matching Christmas pajamas for her 2 boys, I was working long hours at a downtown analytics firm, building a savings account brick by brick. I rented a small apartment with a view of the river and no one to share it with. And for me, that was enough. I didn't have a husband or children, but I had my independence. In my parents' eyes, though, that independence was something incomplete. They never said it outright, but the questions always carried a hook. When are you going to settle down? Don't you want to give us grandkids too? And my personal favorite, still in that little place of yours, I would smile, deflect, and change the subject. Over the years, I thought maybe if I kept showing up helping fix their Wi-Fi when it sputtered, bringing wine to birthdays they forgot were mine, watching Elise's kids so she could take a breath, they'd see me differently. But the truth settled in like dust on the furniture you never touch. I was the steady one, the one they assumed would be fine no matter what, and that was fine by me. Distance kept things civil. I visited on holidays, made polite conversation, and then returned to my own quiet. I didn't know then that distance wouldn't protect me forever, because one day, they would decide the best use of my stability wasn't to applaud it, but to spend it, and they would do it with the same ease as pouring another glass of wine at dinner, expecting me to drink without asking what was in the glass. That day started with a phone call that sounded like good news. My mother's voice was unusually bright when she called that Wednesday afternoon. "Vic, honey, we have such good news. Can you come by tonight?" I almost smiled at the thought. Maybe Elise had finally gotten a big promotion, or my nephews had won some school award. Maybe, for once, it would be a gathering without an agenda. When I walked into my parents' living room a few hours later, my father was in his recliner, my mother perched on the edge of the couch, and Elise sitting beside her, hands folded tightly in her lap. On the coffee table was a thick manila folder, the kind you see in real estate offices. "There she is," Dad said, standing just long enough to hand me the folder. Inside was a mortgage agreement, 3 bedrooms, big yard, fresh paint, exactly the kind of stability Elise's boys deserved. "That's wonderful," I said honestly, glancing at her. "They'll love it." I started to hand the folder back, but my mother pushed it toward me again. "No, sweetheart, those are for you." I frowned. "For me, we've talked it over," Dad began, clearing his throat. "You've been saving for years, and this is something you can handle. You'll take over the mortgage for your sister. The words landed like a cold slap. Wait, you're asking me to pay for Elise's house? She can't afford it, Mom said gently, as if that explained everything. The boys need this, and you're in a position to give it. I looked at Elise, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. I already paid for her divorce attorney, I reminded them, my voice low, and months of her rent when she was between jobs. I've been saving for 10 years for my own place. My father's face hardened. You don't have a husband or children. Victoria, family helps family. This isn't help, I said, standing. This is manipulation. I left the folder on the coffee table and walked out, heart pounding, wondering how they could possibly believe this was reasonable. I thought they might cool down, realize how absurd it all was. I didn't know it was only the opening move. It started with one call from my cousin Amanda, someone I hadn't spoken to since our grandmother's funeral. No, hello? No, how are you? She began. I heard you're refusing to help Elise. Is that true? I gripped the phone tighter. You don't know the full story. I know she's a single mom with 2 boys, and you're sitting on all that money while she struggles. Family helps family, Vic. She'd do the same for you. The bitter laugh slipped out before I could stop it. No, she wouldn't. Amanda's voice sharpened. You're unbelievable, she snapped, and hung up. The calls multiplied after that. Second cousins, family friends, people I barely remembered from childhood barbecues, each one repeating the same script. The subtext was clear. I was selfish because I hadn't built a family of my own, so my resources were up for grabs. The texts came next, then voicemails. They raised you. She has children. You don't. It was like they'd all agreed on a single talking point and were determined to pound it into me. The worst was from Aunt Marie, my mother's older sister. She called during dinner one night, her tone syrupy and practiced. Vic, you're not getting any younger. Who knows if you'll ever have children? At least this way. You'd be contributing to your family's future. I set my fork down. So because I'm single, I owe Elise a house. Don't be dramatic. They need help, and you're in a position to give it. That night, I blocked every number that had chimed in. If they couldn't respect my boundaries, they didn't deserve my peace. Still, the silence that followed was heavier than I expected. It wasn't just the absence of calls. It was knowing how quickly they'd all turned, how little it took for them to see me as the villain. Deep down, I knew this wasn't about the house. It was about control. I had built a life outside the script they'd written for me, and now they were trying to pull me back into it, whether I agreed or not. 2 months later, I found out just how far they were willing to go. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, thick and official-looking. At first, I thought it was insurance paperwork. Then I saw the return address, County Civil Court. I sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I paid my bills and planned my future, and tore it open. The first thing I saw was the caption Plaintiffs Martin and Della Blake, Defendant Victoria Blake. My own parents had filed a civil claim against me. They were demanding $350,000 in reimbursement for the cost of raising me food, clothing, education, even something labeled emotional support during adolescence. At the end, in plain language, the funds were to be used to complete the mortgage on Elise's home. They weren't even pretending it was about principle. I called the best attorney I could find, Marianne Blake, no relation, who met me the next day. She flipped through the packet without flinching. They have no legal right to your money, she said flatly. Parents are obligated to provide for their children. There's no law saying you owe them a cent back. Then why sue me, I asked. Pressure, she replied. They think you'll fold to avoid court, or they truly believe you owe them. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a forensic archivist of my own life. I pulled bank statements, highlighted transfers, $700 and $800 for Elise's rent, $500 to her divorce attorney, $1,000 here, $500 there to my parents when Dad's pension fell short. I dug up old emails from my mother asking for just a little help, and receipts I didn't even remember keeping. Every line item was a memory I hadn't asked to relive. By the time the court date came, I was exhausted but resolute. I wore gray slacks and a blouse my grandmother had given me years ago. My grandparents, Harold and June, showed up in quiet defiance of their own daughter, sitting beside me in the front row, across the aisle. My parents sat with Elise between them, eyes fixed anywhere but mine. Behind them, aunts, uncles, cousins, people who hadn't spoken to me in years filling the benches. When the bailiff called the case, I stood. My knees didn't shake. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one in the only place that mattered now. My father stood first, adjusting his tie like he was about to give a speech at a wedding. "Your Honor, we're not unreasonable people," he began, "but we invested our lives, our money, our time into raising Victoria. We're only asking for a portion of that back to help our other daughter and her children." The judge, a man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and glasses low on his nose, flipped through the file. Specifically, he said, "What did you contribute to her education after she turned 18? My parents exchanged a glance. My father cleared his throat. At that time, Elise had just gotten married. We were helping her and her husband get established. "So you did not pay for the defendant's college expenses," the judge clarified. "No," my mother said quickly, "but my mother, Victoria's grandmother, did. And since she's my mother, I'd argue we supported her indirectly, from beside me." Grandma June let out the faintest scoff. Marianne rose, calm and precise. "Your Honor, we have documentation showing that Ms. Blake has been financially independent since the age of 18. In addition, she has provided repeated financial support to both her parents and her sister." She slid the binder forward. "This includes $700–800 in rent payments for her sister, $5,500 to her divorce attorney, and multiple direct deposits to her parents during reported financial hardship." The judge reviewed the pages silently, then looked up. "So, the defendant was not receiving support, but providing it. Correct?" Marianne said. My mother shifted in her seat. "That money isn't relevant," she argued. "We're talking about the cost of raising her food, shelter, emotional guidance." "Why exactly?" the judge asked. "Do you need $350,000 now?" My mother hesitated, glancing at Elise. "To help Elise pay off the mortgage," she said softly. The judge turned to my sister. "Ms. Carver, do you believe your sister should be responsible for your home loan?" Elise finally met his gaze. "She's not married. She doesn't have children." "I do." The judge's brow lifted. "I'm not married either. Should I pay for my clerk's rent?" The room went quiet. For the next hour, the judge dismantled every justification they offered. By the time we stepped outside, I wasn't sure if I'd won yet. But I knew this: I was no longer the one on trial. A week later, we were back in the same courtroom, but it felt smaller this time, maybe because I could finally breathe in it. The judge didn't waste words. After reviewing the evidence, I find the plaintiff's claim to be without merit. Mr. and Mrs. Blake, the financial responsibility of raising a child does not entitle you to reimbursement once that child becomes an adult. In fact, the evidence suggests Ms. Blake has already provided significant financial support to both you and her sister. He paused, his voice cooling. "Frankly, I find your behavior toward your daughter to be brazen and disappointing." Case dismissed. The gavel hit. And just like that, it was over, at least on paper. Marianne smiled. My grandmother squeezed my arm, and my grandfather whispered, "You're free." I nodded, but there was no rush of victory, no dramatic swell of relief, just a steady, quiet certainty that I had done what needed to be done. I thought the end of the lawsuit would mean the end of the battle. I was wrong. A week later, Grandma called. "Your mother came by yesterday," she said, voice tired. "She asked us to release her inheritance early. I didn't have to ask what for. To pay off Elise's mortgage," Grandma confirmed. "We told her we haven't decided who gets what, and the will is ours to manage." "Did she get angry?" I asked. No, Grandma said. She cried. She begged us not to disinherit her. I didn't know what hurt more, that she asked, or that she cried over money, not me. Months passed, and I closed on a small house of my own. Nothing big, but it was mine. I painted the kitchen yellow, planted tomatoes in the backyard, and adopted a gray cat who liked to nap beside my laptop. I let silence fill the spaces where their voices used to be. Elise eventually rented out her house and moved back in with our parents. They babysat while she worked part-time, and somehow they made it work without me. Almost a year after the trial, an email from my parents landed in my inbox. No subject line, just one short paragraph. Since you now have extra space, we think it would be best if Elise and the boys moved in with you. It would be much more convenient for them there. I read it twice before replying. My reply was short. I will not be hosting Elise or the boys. If you contact me again with these kinds of demands, I will report the harassment to the police. Do not email me again. I hit send, blocked their address, and made tea. The kettle hissed, steam curling into the quiet kitchen. Marble, the cat, jumped onto the windowsill, his tail flicking lazily, as if he understood this was another line I wouldn't let them cross. These days, my house smells like fresh basil and coffee in the mornings. The tomatoes out back are finally ripening, their skins warm from the sun. On Sundays, my grandparents visit with pie or old newspaper clippings they think I'll like. Grandpa helps me with the gutters. Grandma still reminds me to lock the windows at night. Even though I have a security system, we don't talk about my parents unless I ask, and I rarely do. When Grandma once mentioned that my mother was still telling people I'd abandoned Elise, I didn't bite. Apparently, Aunt Marie had told her to stop bringing it up at family gatherings. No one wanted to hear it anymore. That part made me smile. I'm not naive. I know they still believe I failed some unspoken test of loyalty, that I should have stepped in even if it meant giving up everything I'd built. But now I also know this peace isn't given. It's protected. I haven't seen my nephews in over a year. Sometimes I wonder what they've been told, whether they'll ever reach out when they're old enough to decide for themselves, but I don't wait for it. I've started seeing someone mark kind eyes, easy laugh, the kind of presence that feels like space being made, not taken. He doesn't ask about my family, and I don't volunteer. Some ties don't need explaining, and some don't need mending. Every once in a while, I feel the ache of what could have been if they'd ever seen me as more than a spare part, if love hadn't come with fine print, but I don't regret saying no, not anymore. Because here, in this quiet yellow kitchen with sunlight pooling on the counter, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Looking back, I can see how every moment of this past year drew a line between who I was and who I am now. For so long, I thought keeping the peace meant keeping quiet, showing up for birthdays, nodding through the digs about my single life, handing over help when it was asked for, never expecting anything in return. I believed that was what family did. But love that comes with conditions isn't really love. It's a transaction. And once you start treating your worth like it can be tallied on a balance sheet, someone will always find a way to add another charge. The lawsuit wasn't just about money. It was the moment I understood the cost of being the steady one in a family that confuses generosity with obligation. Winning in court didn't bring celebration. It brought clarity. My life, my work, my savings, my peace, they're mine to protect. I've learned that boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're gates you choose when and how to open. And sometimes, closing them isn't cruelty, it's survival. I still miss parts of what I thought we had. I miss the sound of my nephews laughing in the backyard, the idea that we could be a family without scorekeeping. But when I measure that against the weight of what they asked me to give up, the scales tip every time toward the life I've built now. The truth is, walking away wasn't a single step. It was a series of choices, blocking numbers, refusing demands, signing my own mortgage instead of theirs. Each one carved out a little more space where I could breathe without waiting for the next favor to be called in. And here I am, still standing. Not because they didn't take their shot, but because I finally stopped offering myself up as the target.